Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist program that Angela Walker and I ran on. So we're coming close to the budget ceiling deadline. They said June 1st, and Treasury Secretary Yellen said we got until the 5th. We've actually hit the ceiling back in January, but by various accounting and delaying of paying of certain things, they've extended it 6 months, but we're really up against it. And if we go over it, it's going to blow up the world economy. Where the reporting we're getting right now is that the Democrats and Republicans are close to a deal. It looks like once again at the last second, they're going to come up with a deal to raise the debt ceiling so we don't default on our bills. And the deal looks a lot like what the Republicans extorted from the Obama administration back in 2011. But the Democrats, both in 2011 and this year, are not innocent victims in this case. They've let the Republicans publicly bully them into domestic spending austerity, domestic spending cuts. But I think that's maybe what Biden really wanted. He was the main negotiator in 2011, the last time we got this situation, and we got what they called the sequester, which put a freeze on spending. And so they had to cut programs to stay within that limit. Now, the deal that Biden is reportedly agreeing to calls for a spending freeze for 2 years. And that's really a cut because of inflation. Accepted, though, are military spending and the non-discretionary social insurance programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. But there are also other commitments in the package. And one of them in particular is passing Joe Manchin's permitting reform bill. And that has the support of Joe Biden and his administration. And what that will do is open the door to dirty fossil fuel projects like the Mountain Valley Gas Pipeline, that's Manchin's pet project, and the Willow oil drilling project on federal land on Alaska's North Slope. In other words, they're going to make it easy for these dirty fossil fuel projects to go ahead. The proposal means that all the cuts are going to come from non-military discretionary parts of the budget, which only account for 13% of the overall budget. So that means freezing those is going to be a real restriction on, it's effectively cuts because of inflation on domestic programs that particularly the working class depends on, while it has little impact on the overall budget because it's such a small part of it. And we're talking about cuts to education, housing, public transportation, infrastructure, food safety, the environment, financial regulation, the IRS's budget so they can audit and collect taxes from the rich who, try to hide their income, along with those giant corporations and much more. Just basically all the domestic programs. And it's like the sequester. The exact cuts aren't specified. So it's the Republicans in the House are going to be able to dictate what goes on in terms of what gets cut, because they can cut some areas more than others within that 13% of the budget that's non-discretionary domestic spending. And this has been pulled off by the Republicans, I'm saying, with the complicity of the center-right neoliberal Democrats, led by Obama and Biden back in 2011 and Biden this time. And another thing to note is that the deal is for 2 years. So that covers the last 2 budgets of the Biden administration, but leaves the Republicans free, if they recapture the White House, to raise the debt ceiling like they always do when Republicans are in the White House, because in fact, the debt increases have been the greatest under Reagan and Bush and Trump. So it's really not about the debt ceiling. It's about the Republicans using the debt ceiling to extract concessions in terms of our domestic spending. And so Biden is once again joining with the Republicans to impose cuts on domestic spending that hits the working class the hardest, but make it look like the Democrats can blame the Republicans, when in fact, I think they've set it up. You know, they could have avoided this blackmail by repealing the debt ceiling law when they had the majority in Congress up until the end of last December. And this is a 1917 law. It's apparently unconstitutional if you take seriously the 14th Amendment, which says the federal debt cannot be questioned. But they could have, got the debt ceiling law repealed, and they could have done so with urgency after the Republicans. They could have done it in November and December after the Republicans took the House. Instead, the geniuses who lead the Democratic Party thought they could use the Republicans holding the world economy hostage to make them look bad. And in fact, what's happened is the Republicans have won the messaging war. They've got the general public concerned about the deficit and the debt and thinking that has to be part of the deal. So the Republicans have won the messaging on this. And that's what the Democrats get for trying to work with the neo-fascist Republicans instead of just defeating them. And, we had alternatives. The Democrats had alternatives to handing the Republicans a debt ceiling gun with which to shoot them. After the November election, the Democrats could have repealed the filibuster in the Senate. They had the votes. It just takes 51 votes, 50 Democrats plus Vice President Harris, to get the debt ceiling repeal passed, as well as other legislation that the Democrats said was a high priority, like voting rights and abortion rights. And instead, Biden leading the way, but with a lot of people, particularly in the Senate on the Democratic side, going along with him, said, no, we'll work this out in bipartisan cooperation with these far-right Republicans. And failing to get rid of the filibuster or decide not to do that, they still could have made it part of a budget reconciliation bill, which allows the Senate, the reconciliation process allows the Senate to pass a few laws that affect the budget each session by a simple majority. But they didn't do that. And even after the Republicans took control of the House and the legislative remedy of repealing that debt ceiling law had passed, Biden could have invoked the 14th Amendment, which, as I said, says the federal debt shall not be questioned. And instead, they've taken the opposite position. Not only did they not decide not to do that, there's a small federal employee union, 70,000 members, the National Association of Federal Employees, has sued in court to make the debt ceiling go away on the basis of the 14th Amendment. Now, the first hearing's going to be on Tuesday, which is just a couple of days before, the final June 6th drop dead deadline. But the Justice Department under Biden is arguing against the lawsuit brought by this federal employee union. So they're going to argue against what the 14th Amendment says. It's just unbelievable. And then there was another option. Under federal legislation, the Treasury could mint a coin, a platinum coin worth trillions of dollars, deposited it in the Federal Reserve's Treasury account, and then continued paying federal bills that come due from that account without having to raise new debt by selling Treasury bonds to raise that money. So there were ways around this, but Biden and Treasury Secretary Yellen ruled the mint out, the minting of the coin out, or taking on using the 14th Amendment out. So the Democrats here gave the Republicans the power to cut domestic spending against their stated wishes. And that's from the Democratic leadership. But maybe that's the Democratic leadership's real wish. They want fiscal austerity. And they are just trying to set this up so they can say the Republicans made them do it when these cuts come. So all I can say is, that's another reason why we need the Green Party, to fight the far-right crazies rather than try to work with them. I mean, Biden's still trying to do bipartisanship with the party that tried to overthrow his election. And, we don't work with them to impose cuts on programs that benefit the vast majority of us. We fight to defeat them politically. And when we have the power, like the Democrats did, you don't, say we're going to do bipartisanship. You get rid of the filibuster and get these laws passed when you had the opportunity. Now it's passed, and they still aren't fighting with the tools they got, like the 14th Amendment or minting a coin worth trillions of dollars. If we had a multi-party Congress with the Greens in there, the coalitions would have to shift on different issues. Greens would have a lot of leverage in that situation. And if we had an inclusive multi-party democracy, all this nonsense we're going through, which has the world economy freaked out, it's already beginning to hurt, even though we haven't actually not paid any bills yet. But, that Treasury bond market is $24 trillion. That's like the baseline. That's the safest place people around the world put their money. And if they can't count on the U.S. paying off those bonds, it's going to just create an economic chaos. And the fact that we went up to the ceiling close is undermining the stability of the world financial system anyway, because people are going to begin to wonder, can we count on the U.S.? Should we put our money in treasuries? And so it's going to, create a very volatile situation for the world economy, even if we do get this deal passed or they get this deal passed. So, we need a Green Party, and we need to change the rules of elections so we get our fair share of representation and power proportionate to the support our programs have in the general public. And we know they have a lot of support from public opinion polling, from the Green New Deal to Medicare for All. So, we got the people with us. It's just we got a system that excludes us, and that's what we've got to fight. So I'll stop there, and looking forward to your comments and your questions. Violet at Content Boutique. Howie, do you think we'll get our Social Security checks on the 3rd? Yes, you'll get them on the 3rd, because if the Yellen is right, we'll still have a little bit of money left, and they probably figured that payout of checks on the 3rd. I get mine in the middle of the month. They send them out, every week. A different batch of us get them. So you're okay. I might not be, because I get mine, I think, on the 12th or, around there. So I think you're okay, Violet. The rest of us on Social Security might not be. But like I said, I think they'll get a bill passed, and Social Security will go out. Otherwise, boy, if that doesn't get people riled up in this country, I don't know what will. Scout Trooper 164. Polls are saying folks want tougher migrant policy. Would you agree or offer some adjustments? We've got to counter the narrative that immigrants are a problem. They're actually a boon to our economy. They take jobs that most native-born Americans don't want. We have high employment right now, but we have jobs wanting. I've talked about this many times. If we got to a serious Green New Deal, the bottleneck would not be the technology, it would not be the financing. It would be having enough labor to build the new green economy on the time scale, the emergency time scale we're talking about. Those are construction jobs. Those are factory jobs, primarily. Those are the most of the jobs. And those are jobs that immigrants would be glad to do. I think what we need to do is, first of all, treat the migrants humanely. It's not as bad as, the Republicans and Fox News want to make it out to be. There are about 1 million people, ready to come in, and are now starting to, given that Title 42 has expired. That was the provision that allowed the government to just expel people without due process under the pretenses of the COVID emergency. We could have given people vaccines and, dealt with that differently. And I think where we need to move toward is a open borders policy where people can travel back and forth for vacations, for work, for shopping, for residencies. And a lot of people come into this country to work send remittances back to their home countries. And, they would like if they can, build a nest egg to go back with that and rebuild or strengthen their economic standing in their home countries. So, it's not like we're about to be overrun by a lot of so-called foreigners. And the reason a lot of people are coming are U.S. economic policies and political, foreign policies where we have supported coups and right-wing dictatorships. People are running from repression, and we've imposed exploitive economic policies that drain countries in Central and South America and the Caribbean of their economic surpluses. And if we developed more equitable economic relations, then those countries would be developing and people wouldn't be running away from poverty so much. So there's a lot we can do rather than just saying, trying to militarize this problem and say we got to build a wall and put the military on the border and just make the problems that people are running away from even worse. Right across that wall, people are camped out. They're vulnerable to criminal gangs, everything from robbery to child and trafficking women. It's not a good policy, and it's supremely inhumane. So basically, we got to strengthen our ability to bring in and process and get settled immigrants, and get them the permits they need to work, and then take it from there. And this is going to be a huge problem as climate change gets worse, because the estimates are hard to make, but they vary from 100 million to almost a billion climate refugees by 2050. So this is a problem that we've got to find a real solution to, which, as I said, is a combination of welcoming immigrants and letting them be assets to our society, our economy, and also helping the economies, the societies from which these people come, become freer and more economically prosperous. That gets at the roots of mass migration, instead of just trying to build a wall and keep them out and let them suffer on the other side. House DJ. Howie, I'm also concerned about Social Security. Do you think there'll be really big cuts? Not out of this debt ceiling bill. It doesn't propose to cut benefits. It just proposes to actually pay those benefits. That's one of the parts that's exempt. All the cuts will come in that 13% of the overall federal budget that is discretionary domestic spending. But down the road, the Republicans, they have all kinds of proposals to cut Social Security by making the retirement age later. And then if the Social Security fund does run out of money or run low on money, cutting back our benefits proportional to how short they are on cash on hand. And that's something that should never happen. If we just lifted the cap on Social Security taxes, I'm not sure what it is now, it's probably about 130,000. Above 130,000 in income, you don't pay the Social Security tax. If people making more than 130,000 a year in income paid the same flat Social Security tax that those of us make on all the money we make up to 130,000, the Social Security fund would have plenty of money, not only to pay all the benefits already promised, but we could increase Social Security benefits. And that's something we need to do to address senior poverty for those that have only Social Security as a source of income. So that's a fight that's coming. Are we going to cut Social Security, or are we going to, save it and in fact improve it? Nathaniel Gregory, what do you think about the Minnesota movement going on that's passing these progressive bills for workers. These are also helped with some uh, green social organizing projects resources as well, along with others. I'm not familiar on the details. You might have to remind me in the chat, but I think they made it what Minnesota will not be a right to work state. What else did I see? I can't remember the details. I do remember that they passed things that makes it easier for people to organize and follow through on their contracts. And that's what we need to do in states like Minnesota, everywhere we can, at the state level. Because at the federal level now, with the Republicans in the House and a center-right neoliberal Democratic administration, we're not getting progress at the federal level on labor law. The Democrats promised to pass the PRO Act, which PRO stands for Protect Our Right to Organize. And that would have, improved a lot of federal labor legislation, including card check union recognition. So you get a majority of people to sign a card that they want to be in the union, and you have a bargaining unit with which the employer will have to bargain. And if they don't bargain, there are penalties to incentivize them to bargain, which are pretty strong. So that would be great to pass at the federal level. But in the meantime, in those states where we can, we should pass it at the state level. And these are also help with GSOP resources. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. We've had, labor organizers. We had a discussion recently with an Amazon labor union worker organizer in Staten Island in New York. So I think, the resources I can think of is that we're, encouraging and educating around labor rights. So if that's what you're referring to, yeah, we want to add to those resources and hopefully get to the point where we can support campaigns for improving labor rights. Scout Trooper 164, how do you feel knowing that TikTok is going to legally battle Montana for banning them? I feel like Montana is kind of making a political point that they can't carry through. I think TikTok is going to win the legal battle. And the problem is not TikTok, it's social media generally. We've got to actually pass legislation like they have in Europe that will protect our personal and private data. And that becomes our property, which these media companies cannot collect without our permission. That will deal with the privacy issue that is part of the TikTok concern. As far as the social impact of TikTok, I think, that's another thing that I don't have a simple answer to, because I know there are negative consequences. We just had this recent study of a lot of, young women or girls feeling bad about themselves because of the bullying and the image comparisons and so forth on social media, which is, hard for, children basically developing to deal with. On the other hand, we don't want censorship. So I don't have a simple answer to that part of it yet, but, it's something I got to work on. Via email, response to DeSantis announcing his presidency. Well, I thought it was funny that the technology didn't work with Elon Musk right there on the Twitter feed. I just heard that they had 600,000 people tune in, but by the time they fixed their technical problems, it was down to 150,000. Which, I don't think that speaks well to DeSantis's ability to manage stuff. And, what he gets a lot of headlines for in Florida is, trying to tell the Disney Corporation what his policy should be on LGBTQ people and, what books people can read in the schools and, ranting against critical race theory in the schools, which isn't there. vaccine mandates, all these culture war stuff, which, what's he going to do about climate change? What's he going to do about the growing economic inequality in this country? What's he going to do about the debt with respect to our bloated military budget? He hasn't addressed any of that stuff, and I don't expect him to, because I don't think he's really got a program with that. He's got a culture warrior program. He's the anti-woke guy, which is code language for I'm gonna stick it to Black people and Latinos and LGBTQ people and women. So I guess my response to him is, if you want to go to war with Trump. I mean, Trump actually said something that I thought was correct. He said DeSantis needs a personality transplant. Well, DeSantis should throw that right back. Yeah, and Trump needs a personality transplant. All he can do is disrespect people. DeSantis has got to get a backbone and fight Trump, or he's not going to, he's just going to be also ran like every other Republican, because Trump's base is solid. And unless they're able to take him down, they're going to divide the rest of the Republican primary vote, and Trump's going to be the nominee. So if DeSantis is going to the trouble of running, he better run smart. And that would be attacking Trump, who is a target-rich environment, if he wants to do it. But so far, I've seen no evidence of that. He's tiptoed around Trump, and I don't think that's gonna help DeSantis. So anyway, that's my handicapping of that race. I'm more interested in what the left can do for an alternative to these fools. Biden is the lesser evil to Trump, and Trump is certainly a great evil, but Biden has no solutions to the real problems we face, and he's creating, them worse. I forgot to mention when I talked about that budget deal, or maybe I did. Part of it is permitting reform. Joe Manchin's bill. That seems to be part of the deal. It may not be written in the debt ceiling, but it's part of the unspoken agreement that the Democrats and Republicans are going to get together, pass that permit reforming bill, which will enable Manchin's pet project, the Mountain Valley gas pipeline, to go through, as well as other dirty fossil fuel projects like that climate bomb up in Alaska, the Willow Project, to allow oil drilling on federal land on the North Slope. So, there are no real solutions with either of the two major party alternatives. So, for me, the question is, what can we do? How do we get in this election, not be seen as spoilers? It's going to be hard. And get enough attention to move the debate forward on real solutions to these life or death issues. Climate change, the growing economic inequality, the new nuclear arms race, which is, getting worse. And how about just democracy? I mean, the Democrats couldn't get voting rights and election protection passed when they had a majority. So the Republicans are busy making it harder for, Black people and young people and people that don't vote Democrat generally to vote. And then they're setting it up so they can steal elections by putting all the power to make the final decision in Republican-controlled legislatures. I mean, that's a crisis of democracy, which is already a crisis because it's an exclusionary system, winner-take-all, single-member district, which forces most people to vote for the lesser evil in a two-party system. So, we can't afford to wait. People say, well, poor people can't afford a Trump presidency. They can't afford a Biden presidency. Biden has no anti-poverty program. And all these problems just can't wait another 4 years. So if we can get something going on the left to challenge these fools, at least we could probably move the debate. And, like the Green New Deal, Greens made that our signature issue in the 2010s, and it became a term of discussion in the 2020 presidential race. And I've explained many times how AOC and Markey watered down. They just recently reintroduced it. It still doesn't ban new fossil fuel infrastructure and fracking, still doesn't phase out nuclear power, still doesn't make deep cuts in the military budget to help pay for a Green New Deal, extended the deadline for zero emissions 20 years to 2050, and change it from real zero emissions to net zero emissions, which allows for the fantasy that we can keep burning fossil fuels and just capture and sequester the carbon. So even the most progressive Democrats are, basically coming up short on what we need. So, DeSantis to me is irrelevant. The real question for us is, what are we going to do in 2024 in a way that can make a difference and change the terms of debate? Violet at Content Boutique. Howie, the way it is now, I don't see how we can influence this election by running, since we'll be ignored like Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. Any ideas to influence the conversation from the outside? Yeah, I think the same way we did with the Green New Deal. I mean, I first ran on it, and then we got a group of people around the country in the Green Party to sign off on a federal Green New Deal in 2010. And it got us a ballot line in New York for the first time in 8 years. And then 4 years later, running on that same theme, I got 5% of the vote, which shocked Andrew Cuomo, the Democrat who won. And he had to make some concessions, like a $15 minimum wage, a ban on fracking, paid family leave, even though all those were done in a more watered down form than we wanted. We did move the debate. And Jill Stein, she got attention for other things, but the Green New Deal was part of her platform. And, and then we ran on again here in New York in 2018. We know that AOC got the Green New Deal from us because the campaign manager for a Green running for city council became AOC's campaign manager for Congress in 2018 and, brought that idea to AOC. So, through social media and primarily, but also we can get some conventional media because they're going to, ask us, why are we spoiling the election? And, we can say, we're adding positive alternatives and bringing new people out to an election that's already spoiled by a system of, winner take all, plurality wins at the presidential level. So we would have things to say. So I would say, we can't get the kind of coverage that Donald Trump gets or the Democrat, Biden gets. But we can get some coverage and that will have influence. Remember that, the last 3 elections, we got between 400,000 and 1.5 million votes for president for the Green Party between Jill Stein and me. And that's significant. That's hundreds of thousands of people. And those people count. And those are people who have had it with the two-party system. So at least having influence with that and encouraging people and supporting people and, showing each other that we exist. If we disappear, people are going to feel even more isolated. So we have an uphill battle before us, but it would be worse to do nothing. And so that's my argument for we got to try and we got to do the best we can with what we got and keep fighting. Nathaniel Gregory, I'd argue we have no democracy, but we'll create democracy that we were told we live in. No democracy might be a little extreme way of saying it, but we have a diminished democracy, a weak democracy, and we got to create a full participatory grassroots democracy where people, one of the biggest problems is people are alienated. They feel powerless. That's why a lot of people don't vote. They say, why bother? In fact, they decide to check out from even following the news because it's too depressing. And why, be told about something you feel you can't do anything about. So part of, rebuilding democracy is convincing people that by engaging, they can make a difference. B.D. Dimmitt, if you can't vote as a felon, how is it that you can be a president of the United States candidate as a felon? Or is it a race to see Trump convicted of a felony to head him off that way? No, you can be a convicted felon and run. Eugene V. Debs, the Socialist Party candidate in 1920, running from the Atlanta Penitentiary, was convicted of, what was it? It was under the Espionage Act of some form of, treason. He was against U.S. entry into World War I. And so he ran from prison and he got over 1 million votes at a time when, that was about, forget the percentage, it might have been like 5 or 6% of the vote. It was less than that because the women got to vote that election, I think. Anyway, it was a significant vote. And so, yeah, you can run as a felon, but you can't vote as a felon in many states. In many states, once you've served your time and finished parole, you can re-register as a felon. In Maine and Vermont, you can vote as a felon from the jail or the state prison. Those are the only 2 states. And that's what I think ought to be the case. Even if you're a convicted felon, part of the rehabilitation process is, engaging in society and feeling you're a part of it, and being able to vote is part of that process. Anyway, yeah, Trump can run even if he's a convicted felon. The problem is the legal process, particularly at the federal level, moves so slow that Trump may be, either have won or lost the 2024 election before those trials get to the stage where they're coming away with, decisions. So, yeah, Trump will run. And the fact that he's being charged with these crimes, he's going to use as a fundraising thing. It's hard to believe, but that's where we're at. Vicky Gordon, what do you think of the boycott for Target, Bud Light, and Bud Light? Right wingers also a platform, Town Square, which has a list of companies they will boycott for being woke. Yeah, shame on Target for, giving those right wingers even an inch. Target has a period of, many years where this is Pride Month, and so they, feature products and displays and so forth. And they backed away from that. And that's the problem, You don't back away from the right, you fight them and you defeat them. And, our corporate, people that got no backbone or principles are just out to make money. It's not surprising we see that from them. But, the Democrats are supposed to be the reasonable, at least moderate alternative to the far right crazies. They're still talking bipartisanship. So, and right wingers also a platform, Town Square, which has I'm not familiar with Town Square, but yeah, the right wingers, like I said, woke is code for being anti-racist, anti-sexist, pro-gay rights, and the right doesn't like that. So they're anti-woke, and that's a problem. And then we also got on, I call them the post-left, these people that say they come out of the progressive movement, but who say being woke divides the working class. What that really means is it offends some white working class people. And you're not going to unite the working class if you don't deal with our division by race and gender and sex. And, that's how we unite the working class. The working class is majority women, and it's majority people of color in this country. So you want to unite the working class, you got to deal with racism and sexism and homophobia. And these post-left anti-woke people are a problem because they are basically making the same mistake that the left in this country has made for 200 years. The progressive movements, too often, their white leadership decided we're going to tone down our anti-racism in particular so we don't alienate some of our white support. And what that does is alienate the black support, the support of people of color, and does divide the working class. There's a great book on that called Reluctant Reformers by Robert L. Allen. And he goes back to the abolitionist movement, the populist movement, the women's suffrage movement, the socialist movement, the communists, and then the women's movement, and shows how in each case this sort of tolerating racism within the white ranks undermine the power and potential strength of the movement because they lost the black and other people of color and divided the movement. So these post-left, anti-woke, so-called progressives or populists, they're the ones dividing the working class. And I think we got to understand that because they do have a following. Scout Trooper 164, woke was originally a term by black people made to alert to racial prejudice and bias. Yet people twisted it into something completely different. I don't know how different it, when you say you're woke, you say you're aware and you're opposed to that injustice. The anti-woke people are the ones that are, they twist woke into being, unnecessarily provocative or, demanding special privileges or whatever they say. And basically they're saying, get over the racism and the sexism and the homophobia and just, unite on the basis of class, which, like I said, leaves us divided by race and sex and gender if we don't address those problems. Scout Trooper 164, Tim Scott entered the Republican primary. I'm not sure what he has to offer that the party isn't already offering. Well, I think he offers somebody that doesn't need a personality transplant. I mean, the guy is positive. He's definitely conservative. I mean, got a lot of problems with that, but he isn't out there, bashing other people. He's trying to speak in a way that, is welcoming to all sorts of people. That's different than you're getting from the MAGA Republicans. And so far, most of them are, trying to imitate that. Pence won't challenge the MAGA Republicans. DeSantis won't challenge the MAGA Republicans. Haley won't challenge the MAGA Republicans. I think Asa Hutchinson might a little, but anyway, Tim Scott is a little bit different in terms of his, persona and appeal to the voters. So I'll give him that, even though his policies are, hard right conservative and not what we need. Via email, comments, Oath Keeper's 18-year sentence for sedition and other recent high-profile January 6th convictions. My only question is, when are they going to get to the really big fish? I mean, this guy who was the leader of the Oath Keepers was higher up the food chain, but what about Roger Stone and Steve Bannon and Meadows, who was Trump's chief of staff, and Trump himself, and some of these members of Congress that were, on the planning and promotion of January 6th. I'm waiting for, their day in court to come. And that's where the federal judicial system is moving at a snail's pace. And, where are we now? It was 2020, it was 2021, 22, 23. We're two years and counting since those events happened. And, those people have yet to face any indictments. I understand from the lawyers that, it takes time to build a case and get your evidence and whatnot. But man, I'm impatient for them to be brought before the bars of justice. Ashley R. Uncle Tim Scott is no ally of the progressive wing of the Green Party. Come, TF means the fuck, I guess, on. I didn't say he was an ally of the progressive wing of the Green Party. I agree with you there. Scout Trooper 164. Howie, what do you think of the Freedom for Russia Legion? For me, it shows Russia is starting to finally be fed up with Putler. And yes, I call him that because he's acting like Hitler. Yeah, Putler is something a lot of Ukrainians who speak English, maybe they say it in Ukrainian too. Anyway, I know that's a common disparagement of Putin by Ukrainians. Let's see, there were two groups that went into the Belgorod Oblast just across the border from Ukraine. And one was the volunteers, I guess. That group has neo-Nazis in it. And that's a problem for Ukraine. It doesn't look good. The Freedom for Russia Legion is part of the International Legion of people who are not Ukrainian who are fighting the Russians in Ukraine. And I think, okay, on the positive side, it showed, Russia's defenses are not that strong. They say their goal is to force Russia to put troops on the border, taking them away from the front line of the fight within Ukraine. I guess those are legitimate military objectives. And what it says to Putler's image as a the strong man, invincible man who makes all the right decisions, strong decisions, that was undermined by that incursion. On the other hand, Ukraine is fighting to get Russia out. It's up to the Russians to change Ukraine, and the fact that it's obviously had logistical support from the Ukrainians is problematic. So. If I was, in Ukraine, I would, in the military leadership, I would keep my distance from this kind of action. They need to maintain international support, and if they're associated with the other faction, not the one you named, that has neo-Nazis in it, who are also part of this action, and then this international legion, which had Ukrainian logistical support. You're kind of undermining their narrative, which is we're fighting to get the Russians out. Russians have to take care of their problems with Putin. So I guess I would say in general, I'm ambivalent about what happened. There was positive sides to it, but there are definitely negative sides. Scout Trooper 164. Honestly, the Battle of Bakhmut is a Pyrrhic victory for the Russians. They took the city, but with manpower gone, ammo gone, and other resources gone, Ukraine has really played them. I hope you're right. To me, it does look that way. But it's really hard to, count on the reporting we're getting about casualties. I mean, you listen to the Russian propaganda, and Ukrainians were losing troops to the Russians and the Wagner mercenaries on a 10-to-1 ratio, which is hard to believe. Normally the standard thing is the assault force loses 3 times more than the defenders. And Ukraine has been very tactically smart and sophisticated to probably lower that ratio. So, but again, it's hard to, know what the real numbers are. It definitely drained a lot of resources from Russia and Ukraine as well, but maybe less so. And as this Ukrainian offensive gets underway, some say it's already underway in that they're doing preparation of the battlefield by attacking Russian supply depots and command centers in Zaporizhia and Kherson and other parts of Russian-occupied territory. We'll have to see how that plays out. But, one thing that's clear from what we do know from reliable polling is the Ukrainian people. This is a people's war. It's not just people in the military fighting, it's the whole society, almost to the last Ukrainian. They're, if they're not in the military side of it, they're providing humanitarian and mutual aid to people affected by the war, from all the refugees who need housing and food to the, other needs of the military besides ammo. And, and we know from the polling that they've been asked 5 times now by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, whose polling is considered, good by sociologists, around the world, that over 85% in each of the polls since last May, when asked, are you willing to concede some land to Russia for early peace? or is that not acceptable and you want to fight until the Russians are pushed out? And the most recent poll in February was 87% said no land concessions. And that just shows you how angry the Ukrainians are at what the Russians are doing, particularly in the occupied territories, with the filtration camps where they, interrogate people as to where their loyalties lie, and if they lie with Ukraine, they might be detained, tortured, raped, executed, deported to Russia. These are all crimes against humanity. There's thousands of children have been basically kidnapped and deported to Russia. The Ukrainian people are so mad about that. They don't want to leave their people under Russian occupation. And then, the assault on the civilian population by the Russian military continues. Last night, a bomb fell in Dnipro, destroying a hospital. There have been over 500 hospitals and clinics bombed by Russian airstrikes over the course of this war. Ukrainian people are mad as hell. So they're going to keep fighting. That seems pretty clear. But Scout Trooper, I hope you're right that the Ukrainian tactics worked out and they drained the Russian invaders. So that will make their counteroffensive give it better chances as this spring and summer goes on. Emil Sachs, Howie, will the National Greens make any statement to address the looming Indian Child Welfare Act decision? Oil corporations are behind the push to strip indigenous communities of their rights, right? So the oil corporations can get access to indigenous land. And I did say on a previous podcast that I would see what I could do to get a statement. And I intend to do that. I've just been swamped with other work, but it's an important issue and the Greens should speak out on it. And I will follow up on that when I get the chance, I promise. Via email, thoughts on the continued state level attacks on reproductive rights and what we should be doing to push back. Well, we got to push back in those states. We got to push back in the states where we still have reproductive rights and strengthen those rights. For example, by passing laws that codify the rights in Roe v. Wade at the state level. We've done that in New York. Many more states could do that. And pushing back, we got to, there's some Democrats who are the alternative to the anti-abortion folks who avoid the abortion issue. And that's why we need to be running our own candidates so the issue cannot be avoided. And we can mobilize the majority of people who do want abortion rights at some level or other. It depends on the specific conditions. If you look at the polls, how late in an abortion, in a pregnancy and so forth. But generally people want, women to have access to an abortion, certainly early in a pregnancy and under circumstances like incest and rape and those kind of conditions, or in the health of the mother at stake. So, it's an issue that we just can't let drop because the Republicans are not going to let it drop. It's the way they mobilize their base, and they've now got an ideological commitment, which is not just about abortion, it's about keeping women subordinate. And so it's something that needs to be an important issue that we keep talking about. Violet Content Boutique. Howie, have you noticed how many new species are being discovered all over the world? Remarkable. Are they the product of radioactive mutations? No, I think they're the product of discovery. I mean, there's still much of the world, we haven't explored, like, the bottom of the sea, or, areas of that are still undeveloped in some of the rainforests of the world. And there's so many species out there, particularly things like insects and microbes, but also birds and even mammals. I mean, they discovered new mammals in Southeast Asia recently. So I think that's just the advance of science, and the advance is accelerating because, I think they're more people out there looking and cataloging these species. And one thing that research has shown is that we're in the midst of a mass extinction crisis because of changes to the environment we've wrought and destruction of habitat. So these new species discoveries hopefully give impetus to the conservation and environmental protection efforts we need so that, all the species can have their spot on the green earth and the blue sea. John T. 4321. Reforms to capitalism do not work. People are going to realize they need to organize socialist industrial unions. This would be the foundation for system change. I agree, capitalism does not work in terms of meeting people's needs and protecting the environment and creating and maintaining a peaceful world. Okay, what I mean by reforms is by trying to change capitalism into socialism. However, demands on social problems and issues need to continue. Social solutions are a system change away. Yeah, I would agree. I think the way you build a movement to change the system is by getting people involved in a specific reform, say Medicare for all or full employment. Let's take full employment. And when people, fight for a job guarantee, and as they get in the fight, they begin to realize that the capitalists in charge of the system don't want full employment. They want unemployed people to keep overall wages down. So, that's how the capitalist system works. So then people begin to realize you can't have a job guarantee until you get beyond capitalism. And you can find that with a lot of issues. Medicare for all is maybe one the system can accommodate. It has in the wealthier countries that provide, medical, social insurance, publicly financed to one degree or another. We do to a small degree in this country. But in any case, fighting people, they begin to see that it's not just the issue that's the issue, it's the system that's the issue. And that, I think, is, why. And this is a long socialist tradition. Socialists should be in the middle of, in the leadership of reform struggles, but providing the perspective that just winning this one reform is not going to solve all the problems we face, and we need system change. So the economy and the political system are truly democratic. So they're responsive to the people's needs. So, yeah, we got to go beyond capitalism, and how to get there is a whole nother thing. You mentioned socialist industrial unions. That comes out of the Daniel De Leon and the Socialist Labor Party, which is the oldest socialist party, or was the oldest socialist party in the country. It started back in the 1800s, and De Leon is, I guess, the way you pronounce his last name. Became a leader around the turn of the century, the 1900s, the early 1900s, and pushed that. Although they also ran candidates, but the idea was, and this was also the wobbly idea, that you organize left-wing unions that then lead a general strike that enables us to overthrow capitalism. And I think, a general strike is probably part of the process. Given our political culture and history, I think the precipitation might be electing a government that wants to make radical reforms, and then capital goes on strike. And so then labor has to go on strike and seize the means of production and the power there. That is all part of the process. And that's worth, discussing and thinking about, because social change happens in leaps, and we may get into a period where things are moving fast, and we should have some vision and coordinates for how we're going to make the transition to socialism. But the immediate problem is to just get a damn socialist movement with a mass base moving. I mean, right now, what is called socialism is going into the Democratic Party and supporting liberal New Deal type programs. That's what Bernie Sanders was doing. That's what the squad is doing. And while they may not only call themselves socialists to some audiences, they're really not part of a movement that has that radical perspective. It's a reformist perspective. And we need an independent left that understands we need radical change, and we're not going to change capitalism incrementally, bill by bill, legislation by legislation, without the capitalists fighting back. I mean, we saw that, Chile is a good example. When Allende got in there and his slogan was, must make haste slowly, he was talking about the balancing act he had to do between pushing for reforms that the grassroots, the mass movement was demanding with factory occupations and citizen assemblies in the neighborhoods, and in the right, the military, and the far right in Chile, which was ready to dispense with democracy. And that's what they did. They had a military coup. The U.S. backed it. Allende was killed, and they, killed about 20,000 of the supporters of that government, that socialist government, and they had 17 years of military dictatorship under Pinochet. So that's one example of many we should study and, put into our thinking about how we're going to get to where we want to go. But the immediate task is to just get an independent left political movement going that isn't co-opted and pacified inside the Democratic Party. Vicky Corden, reproductive rights and LGBTQIA rights need to be protected. How do we deal with these right-wing judges pushing draconian laws? Well, draconian interpretations of laws or approving draconian laws that are questionable on a constitutional basis. You deal with these judges. I mean, a lot of these judges are elected, particularly at the local level and at the state level in many states. So there's one place we need to deal with them. And then the rest are appointed, and that's coming from, the Democrats and Republicans. After they're in there and they start doing their dastardly deeds, except where they have elections, a lot of these appointments are life or for certainly long terms, and they're pretty invulnerable. Although political pressure, larger political climate definitely influences what judges will do. I think we never would have had the Warren Court, starting with Brown versus Board of Education, through many decisions they made in the 60s and early 70s, without a civil rights movement. In an international context, that was favorable because at that point, it was a bipolar world, the West led by the US and the Soviet bloc led by the Soviet Union, competing for the allegiance of people in the global South. And America, being a Jim Crow apartheid state, was a hard sell in the global South. So there was pressure at the elite level to get rid of our segregation system. So, those things converge between the mass movement and the international situation to make it politically acceptable for the Supreme Court to make some good decisions in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. So that's another way we influence them, by changing the political climate and, building movements that even judges cannot ignore. Boy, these hours go fast. So, okay, well, thanks for being here today. I hope discussion was helpful for people in thinking about their organizing and activity and what's going on in the world. The next 2 weeks in South Korea, I'll be flying during the next podcast and then over there the following Saturday. And given the time changed, I'm going to have to record the program for the following Saturday. And I will find somebody from somewhere in the green world, or maybe a few people, to come on a podcast, and we will talk about what's going on in their countries and internationally. Next Saturday, either me or Chris Blankenhorn, who is behind the screen, are going to interview somebody. And so we'll have a interview, and we have somebody in mind, and we'll try to pull something together. I just can't do a podcast from an airplane because the time this podcast would go, I'll be somewhere between Detroit and Incheon, South Korea. So, so that's what's coming up, and I hope everybody is, not just following what's going on, but trying to do something about it, because that's the only way things are going to change. So everybody have a good week. Keep your fingers crossed. We don't go over the debt ceiling and over that cliff. And we'll see you next week and in the following weeks.